This training component is about your role as ARC chairperson and members in development of an individual education program. This is meant to be an overview of the IEP development process. An in-depth training based upon the IEP guidance document is available from your cooperative. As we progress through the training, please stop and reflect on what you are learning and develop questions for clarification based on your prior experiences. If you have further questions, please contact your special education director or the cooperative working with your district. This presentation is one in a series of trainings for districts, school leadership, and ARC teams on understanding special education. Understanding the basics of special education is one of the targeted goals of these resources. Schools and ARCs must understand the core special education legal foundations and entitlements. As we develop quality special education programs, it is not adequate to follow rules without the understanding of the rationale for each of the procedures. Understanding of the true nature of the term individualized instruction is critical to the development of a quality IEP and special education program. This requires understanding that while students may share disabilities, they are not all the same, and planning for their needs is not a cookie-cutter approach. Understanding that special education is not a separate place or program, but a set of services and supports tailored to the needs of individual students is critical to meeting the needs of students. The involvement of all students in the standards, assessments, and accountability has, for many, changed the meaningfulness of special education programs within the school or the district. Schools and leadership must create conditions within their schools that support effective special education practices and integrate special education into all aspects of school improvement. Creating quality special education programs is based upon the following information. Students who receive special education are a very diverse group. A large number of these students share many characteristics with other low-achieving students. Special education is not a separate program or place. It is a system of supports and services in a school. Finally, special education practices may vary, but the core principles remain consistent. The last slide in this module will list resources which may further assist you in your learning. So, what is an IEP? It stands for Individualized Education Program. IDEA, the federal special education legislation, requires public schools to develop an IEP for every student with a disability who is found to meet eligibility to receive special education and related services. The IEP describes the student's needs and strengths, annual goals, specially designed instruction, and supplementary aids and services to address the needs of the student, modifications to the general education program, and where and for how long services will be provided to the student in order to achieve goals. The IEP refers to both the educational program to be provided to a child with disabilities and to the written document that describes their educational program. An IEP is a legal contract between the school district and the parent or guardian. One of the legal requirements for students with disabilities is the provision of a free, appropriate public education, commonly referred to as FAPE. The courts and laws have clarified that FAPE is provided in accordance with the child's IEP and is reasonably calculated to confer benefit. Recent guidance has been issued regarding the reasonable progress. The recent guidance talks about that progress must be more than the minimum or de minimis. As a school leader, your role is to help all ARC members focus on meeting the compliance requirements of the IEP and develop an individual plan that guides the process for meeting achievement and functional outcomes needed for each student. This process also guides the reducing of gap between the performance of each student and their similar age peers. This planning should be a guide for supervision of the learning throughout the school year. Involvement in the Admissions and Release Committee also provides you with critical information that guides other leadership functions throughout the school year. The focus on the plan just begins during the ARC meeting. Throughout this training, you'll be asked to reference a student contrived whose name is Candace. Candace is a made-up student and is utilized for sample purposes. The Candace document is available through your co-op and is attached along with this training. We will pause within each component of the training and ask that you take time to study the Candace IEP before moving forward. We will also ask that you then reflect upon the practices and examples in your experiences. As you think about the sample IEP and your experiences, we will then give you guidance on how to measure progress in the development and implementation of the IEP. This will include looking at the Compliance Record Review document for this school year. You can find the Compliance Record Review document within the resources of this folder. To fully measure school improvement, analyzing student growth as it relates to the student's progress on mastering IEP goals, as well as progress on universal screeners, common assessments and state assessment results must be viewed for each student. This process will assure that all educators are working to meet the needs of each student. The graphic on this slide depicts the IEP development process. It answers the question, what must be included in an IEP? Again, notice the IEP is a process and not an event. Notice the focus on the IEP as a process. It's critical for student success that the development of an IEP not be a once-a-year event to complete the document called an IEP. The development of this document should be the beginning of a process of planning and implementing individual education programming to accomplish the learning goals of a student. Notice the connections between the parts of the IEP and the sequence of guiding the discussion around the process. We begin with development of the present levels of educational and functional performance. This is the section of the IEP where the Admissions Release Committee will use data from all ARC members to clearly state, in measurable terms, the current strengths and needs of the student in relationship to the standards and the peers. Present levels then guide the consideration of special factors and the development of annual goals. Annual goals are then the connection to short-term objectives or benchmarks and will include methods of measurement, specially designed instruction, supplementary aids and services, accommodations, and the determination of where services are provided. As an ARC chairperson, each of the components must be discussed and decisions made as to the content of each component. Your guidance to encourage the general education teacher and the parents in discussion at this point will build the foundation for understanding of the student at later stages of the process. It's important to note that this is a process and not an event that's completed once the IEP document is written. The process continues through the implementation and monitoring of the IEP. This progress data then become a critical component of the next IEP. So what's the purpose of an IEP? The purpose of an IEP is to support educational performance of students with disabilities. It does this by providing students with disabilities access to the general curriculum, ensuring that they will make progress in the general curriculum, addressing the student's other unique needs, and by providing the student with transition services needed to assist the student in reaching post-secondary goals related to training, education, employment, and if necessary, independent living. It should again be noted that IEP is a process, not an event. Frequent and varied progress measures should be gathered to determine the effectiveness of the process and of student growth. Who develops the IEP? The graphic depicted on this slide shows the collaborative nature of IEP development in Kentucky. The IEP is developed by the ARC that consists of a team of individuals, including key school staff and the student's parents. The team meets, reviews the assessment information available about the student, and designs an educational program, or IEP, to address the student's educational and functional needs relevant to the disability. IDEA, the law that requires and outlines the special education process, describes the IEP team as including the following members: the parents of the student. Parent input must be considered in IEP development and revision. Not less than one regular education teacher of the student. It should be a regular education teacher who works with the student in the general education courses, or one who can provide information about general curriculum for their same age peers. Not less than one special education teacher of the student. Duly certified teachers in grade K through 12 may not serve multiple roles. For example, a special education teacher, who is also certified in regular education, cannot serve as the special education teacher and the regular education teacher. Preschool teachers, who are interdisciplinary early childhood certified, can serve a dual role as a special education teacher and the regular education teacher. A representative of the school district, who is qualified to provide or supervise the provision of specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs of students with disabilities, is knowledgeable about the general education curriculum, and is knowledgeable about the availability of resources of the public agency. This is usually a school leader, like a principal, counselor, or other person given the authority to expend funds and assign staff. This role cannot be a dual role for a person meeting one of the other assigned roles. An individual who can interpret the instructional implications of evaluation results when appropriate. This may be a dual role. Other individuals who have knowledge or special expertise regarding the student, including related services personnel, as appropriate, and the student with a disability when appropriate. ARC membership is measured by matching the roles on the invitation to the signatures of those in attendance on the conference summary. ARC meetings should not be held without a fully constituted ARC. A good IEP can take time and requires good data and good communication. Your role in this is to ensure that time for development of the IEP is arranged, that data is available to the ARC members, and communication is open and beneficial to the process. What data do we use in IEP meetings? Data is critical to the development of an IEP. Data varies based on the type of IEP meeting. The two types of ARC meetings are the initial and the annual review meeting. The annual review meeting is where the initial IEP is developed. The annual review meeting is the meeting that is held within 1 year based upon the end dates for the current IEP. In this meeting, the current IEP is reviewed and the new IEP is developed. Data used for each meeting will vary. The initial IEP meeting is pretty straightforward. It's the first meeting after the child has been determined eligible for special education and permission for specially designed instruction has been obtained from parents. During the initial meeting, the ARC considers all current data in their decision-making. Only current data should be utilized by the ARC to make decisions for individual student programs at all times. The ARC must provide an explanation of the data that describes relative strengths, needs or concerns, and baseline data, which would include information about how the student learns. This data is used to guide the ARC in present level performance development. In an initial ARC meeting, the IEP is developed based upon data from all of the areas noted above. The majority of the data will be located within the Integrated Assessment Report and consist of the RTI data used as a basis for referral and the individual assessments completed in the report. However, the ARC should also have access to other data, such as classroom performance data, like examples of informal observations, district assessment data, and state assessment data. Each year after the initial placement meeting, within 364 days, there must be an annual review meeting. During this meeting, the ARC will still consider the assessment report, district assessments, and state assessments. However, the progress monitoring data of the IEP will carry more weight because it is the most recent and directly tied to student progress. How is the IEP managed? Finally, the district must ensure that the IEP document and resources are accessible to everyone who provides an instructional service to the student, and that the IEP is being implemented. The ARC develops the IEP, ensures IEP implementation, reviews progress toward the annual goal at least every 12 months, and revises the IEP as appropriate. The ARC chair directs and monitors individuals in implementing and monitoring the student's progress toward the IEP goals. This discussion should be clearly discussed and documented within the IEP and conference summary. If others are to work with the student who are not in attendance at the ARC meeting, it's important to share this information and confirm that they understand their role in IEP implementation. So how do we know if the ARC is developing and implementing an IEP that guides student outcomes? To measure the legal and procedural development of an IEP, one tool is the use of the record review to determine compliance. The current year compliance record review document is available to show the criteria for compliance of each step of due process. The section of IEP development clarifies if the document is adequate to meet requirements. This tool is located on the Kentucky Department of Education website, and further training is available from your school district or cooperative. You can measure the student's progress on IEP goals by reviewing the progress data collected. It's critical that the review of this data be ongoing and that the data be used to drive instruction. If a student is not making progress toward goals, and the changes to the instructional methods is not working, an ARC may need to convene to revisit the appropriateness of the IEP. Student growth should also be measured as part of school-wide procedures for evaluating all student progress. When universal screeners, district or school-wide common assessments, and state assessment data is used to guide continuous growth, students with disabilities should be included in this process. This allows for analysis on varying levels to calculate the degree of access to general curriculum and measures the reduction of the gap between this student and their peers. Measures of readiness for success in preparation for college and career success is critical to the future of all students. This may include many areas of functional need as well as academic focus. These measures assist the Admissions and Release Committee in looking at the student's progress in discrete ways as well as long range. They also assist the ARC in fulfilling their responsibilities. The remainder of the section of the IEP module of the ARC Chairperson training will focus on the components that must be included in an IEP. As we proceed through this training, we'll use the tabs at the top of the page to assist you in visualizing the IEP development process, and we will follow as we walk you through each step. At this time, it would be helpful to have a copy of the completed Canvas IEP available for review. The form on the screen is a blank form for documenting the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. Looking at the form's organization guides the ARC through a thorough summary of the student's descriptors. The present levels of the academic achievement and functional performance are the foundation of the IEP. Present levels are the first thing you see when viewing an IEP. When developing the IEP present levels, the ARC must consider the strength of the student, the concerns of the parents, the results of recent evaluations as appropriate, and the results of the student's performance in general or district-wide assessments or the functional need of the student. The present levels of academic achievement and functional performance are a summary of information and data of what the student currently knows and is able to do in the following areas: communication, academic performance, health, vision, hearing, and motor abilities, social and emotional status, general intelligence, transition needs, and functional vision learning media assessment results. Present levels of academic achievement describes the student's most recent performance in skills and strategies related to reading, math, and written language. The description includes the student's ability to generalize his or her learning. Present levels of functional performance means activities and skills that are not considered academic and are used in the context of routine activities of everyday living. This information may be documented in a variety of present level areas, including communication status, health, vision, hearing, and motor status, social and emotional status, transition needs, and functional vision and learning media assessment results. General intelligence is included as it relates to academic achievement and functional performance. Therefore, present levels are individualized, specific, and measurable. While ARC chairpersons may not be actually the one writing the present levels, it's important that they understand the process and know how to access the IEP guidance document for more detailed information. This document can be found on KDE's website. Guiding the discussion to clarify these steps involves all parties in the development of the present levels. The process includes 1. In Step 1, identify the standards for the grade level of the student. What are all students expected to know and be able to do? Step 2. Using the student performance and baseline data, determine the student's educational performance in academic and functional areas. For each area in the present level of performance, determine if the student is performing within the range of academic and functional performance of non-disabled grade and age peers, and indicate that the student is commensurate with similar age peers and no additional information is needed. If the ARC wants to provide additional information, this may be documented in the present levels or conference summary action notice. Step 4 uses the word describe. The ARC must describe relative strengths, needs, or concerns, and baseline data for each need or concern for any area that's not marked as commensurate with similar age peers. What does that mean? It means that we need more than just numbers. The ARC needs to provide an explanation of the data to provide a foundation for the other components of the IEP. So the present level should include information about how the student learns. Step 5 is about the impact of the disability on the student's involvement and progress in the general curriculum. Describe how the student's performance interferes with learning in each area of concern. Don't merely state that it does. It would be helpful at this time to review Candace's present level of performance and determine that all areas are marked as commensurate with similar age peers, or that the information provided includes baseline data that describes the student's current status and the impact on the student's involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. If you need more clarification, reference your most recent record review document. The graphic on this slide will help you with the organization of baseline performance. We've mentioned baseline data as a requirement for our present level of performance statement. Let's define and clarify this very important term. In the first box, baseline performance describes the student's current performance of a skill or strategy in measurable terms. For example, words per minute, or the percentage of words. Correct in 3 out of 5 trials, the number of minutes to sustain a behavior, the level of prompts necessary to sustain a behavior. The baseline serves as a starting point for IEP instruction. The second box shows examples of baseline data for an initial IEP is based on student performance data, research-based interventions, and instructional data within the Integrated Assessment Report. Examples of baseline data for subsequent IEPs is based on IEP progress monitoring as described in the third box. Non-examples of baseline data may include IQ scores, standard scores of achievement, and a doctor's diagnosis. While the non-examples may be included in present level information, they are not baseline data and cannot generate goals. Present level of educational and functional performance continued. Present level information should clearly communicate the student's strengths and concerns. The example above is written clearly, and the use of baseline information clarifies one area of concern and guides the next step of IEP development and discussion. Let's locate the baseline data. Anna has a sight vocabulary of 150 words. What other baseline data should be included above? To develop the present level to communicate more than a need for sight vocabulary, measures of which phonetic cues and how frequently she uses them is needed. Clarification of the use of context clues must be clearly defined and measured. It's important to note in the present levels what specially designed instruction is working for the student and what has been used in the past that did not work. Can you locate the baseline now? Determining effect. One of the most difficult parts of the present levels is determining how the disability affects the child's involvement in the process of general curriculum. This is sometimes referred to as "so what?" or the adverse effect factor, because even if a student has a disability, that does not mean that the disability has an effect in the involvement of progress of the general curriculum. For example, Jose, age 16, cannot read. So what's an effect of his ability to read in post-secondary transition areas, such as work or home living, or an achievement of his life goals? Beginning when the student is in 8th grade or has reached the age of 14, whichever comes first, the transition needs area focuses on the needs related to the student's planned course of study. By age 16, the focus is also on the transition services, which assist the student in reaching post-secondary goals. Transition must include one or more of the following areas: instruction, related and community services, development of employment, post-school adult living objectives, acquisition of daily living skills, and if appropriate, provision of a functional vocational evaluation. For preschool children, it means how the disability affects a student's participation in the appropriate activity. The ARC writes effect statements only in areas where the student is not commensurate with their peers. Three questions help us answer an impact statement. What is the exceptionality? How does the exceptionality impact the student's involvement in the general curriculum? And what academic areas are impacted due to the student's exceptionality? Here are some sample impact statements. Take a moment and review the information on the slide that contains affect examples and see if they clearly express the effect of the disability on the progress and learning of the student. Take time to look at the present level performance for Candace. Do you see good examples of statements of performance and measures of baseline? Can you locate the impact statements? Does the present levels clearly define the strengths and concerns of Candace? Does the present level guide you as an educator and parent to next steps in assisting Candace's learning? How will this learning impact future IEP development? After the present level is completed, comes the consideration of special factors. This page of the IEP document is relatively straightforward. Special factors has questions specific to behavior, English language proficiency, blindness or visual impairment, communication, deafness or hearing impairment, and assistive technology. The bottom line is that the ARC must address each question and considers these issues in the development of the IEP. Information within the present level statement must support that a special factor exists. The needs or concerns described in present levels must align with the special factors as addressed and be documented in the conference summary notes. For example, let's assume that the child is eligible to receive services for emotional or behavioral disorders. The box under the question asking if the child's behavior impedes his or her learning or the learning of others would need to be checked. Lastly, the bottom of the Special Factors page contains the Statement of Devices or Services section. Any questions that were answered with yes requires a statement of services and devices to be provided and must be included. You must check a box to tell where the statement is located. Your options include specially designed instruction, supplemental aids and services, behavior intervention plans, or others. If you mark Other, you must specify where this information is located. Measurable annual goals. Annual goals are statements of anticipated results to be achieved in a calendar year or less. A goal relates directly to the student's disability and pertains to needs described in the present levels of performance. Goals focus on bridging the gap from where the student is, as determined by baseline in the present levels, to where the student needs to be, or their goal, relative to identified KCAS academic skills and the appropriate functional skills. So what is a measurable annual goal? Annual goals are statements of anticipated results to be achieved in a calendar year or less, as determined by the ARC. Annual goals are not written to restate the content standards, but should specify skills for the student to acquire that will promote accessing the general curriculum and aid the student in meeting the achievement standards. The IEP is not intended to reflect the student's entire curriculum. The IEP should promote learning of skills that students need to develop, which will advance greater mastery and understanding of the general curriculum content and build student independence. Annual goals are directly related to the student's disability and pertain to needs described in the present levels. Goals are focused on bridging the gap from where the student is, their baseline, to where the student needs to be, their goal, and address both academic and functional skills. Copying and pasting a standard into a student's IEP without including the components of the goal will not suffice as a measurable annual goal. Measurable annual goals assist the IEP implementers in setting targets for instruction and enabling students to access and to make progress in the general education curriculum. Annual goals should be based upon the information in the present levels of performance. When designing measurable annual goals, the ARC must ensure that the goals are written to enable progress in the general education curriculum, as well as remediation of skills, related to the needs of the student as evidenced in the present levels. For students aged 16 or older, they're developed to reasonably enable the student to reach his or her post-secondary goals. Measurable annual goals are written so that the behavior can be seen, heard, or counted. Annual goals must include the method of measurement. And finally, annual goals describe the performance that will reasonably occur within 1 year. This does not guarantee that the student will accomplish the goal. So how do we develop an annual goal statement? We prioritize the skill area or areas that will have the most powerful impact on accelerating student performance from his or her instructional level toward the identified age and grade level standards. So some questions might include these. What skill area or areas does the student need to improve in order to access and progress in the general curriculum? What skill area or areas warrant remediation in order to advance the student toward grade level standards, as well as promote access and progress in the general curriculum? What other factors influence the prioritization of annual goals, such as the number of years left in school? What behavior is most modifiable? What are parent and student interests, such as toileting skills or leisure activities, that have a positive impact on the family? Write measurable annual goals to address the prioritized skill areas. Include the following components in each goal. A, an audience. B, a behavior, which is also understood as a skill. C, the circumstance. D, the degree or criterion. And E, the method of evaluation. Frequency, monthly, only for OT and PT, as they may only see students monthly. Districts have a dual responsibility to address access to and progress in the general curriculum and remediate skills that are below grade level. A graphic similar to the one displayed on this slide, is often used when teaching how to write measurable annual goals. It's highly recommended ARC chairpersons receive training in IEP development. The components mentioned here are reviewed and practiced in each IEP training. Now take a moment to reflect on the annual goal for Candace. Notice the A, or audience, is Candace. The B, or behavior, described is following directives. The C, or circumstances, are verbal, regarding basic concepts of attribute, space, and category. And the D, or degree or criteria, is 80% accuracy over 3 consecutive sessions. The E, or evaluation method, is below the annual goal. Reflect on the IEP from your experiences. Can you identify the required components of an annual goal? Can you guide the ARC to include all parts of the annual goal? In this example, you can identify baseline data within the present level statements and how it guides the ARC to determine needs. The baseline data included in the present level is data about literacy questions at 70%, made up of answering main ideas, key details, and retelling of stories and inferential questions at 40%. Made up of making predictions and connections between events, characteristics, and ideas. This helps to structure the annual goal by clarifying the audience, which is Candace, the behavior, or skill, which is reading a passage and answering questions, the circumstances, which is a controlled text passage, Candace's instructional level, the types of text, independently reading the passage and orally responding to questions are written into the goal. The degree or criterion is 80% accuracy over 3 out of 4 assignments. Frequency is weekly, and the method of measurement is an indirect measure, which was defined as a permanent product. As mentioned, goals and benchmarks must be measurable and written so behavior can be seen or counted. In addition, to make sure they're written appropriately, the IEP must include how they'll be measured. In general, the more specific the method of measurement, the better. 4 general methods of measurements are used for progress monitoring. 1 is a curriculum-based measurement. Curriculum-based measurement is an approach using probes to measure growth of student proficiency. 2nd, direct measures. Direct measures involves direct observation of performance and recording of the student's response. 3rd, indirect measures. Indirect measures involve using scoring criteria to review the performance of a student's product. And 4th, authentic assessment measures a student's performance in tasks and situations that resemble real-life situations and real-life tasks. Authentic assessments require an additional method of measurement. In the example of Candace, the method of measurement described was a direct measure. This would require a checklist or frequency count as a method of collecting the data. The ARC should be clear on how Candace's progress will be measured and by whom. This then guides towards the development of short-term objectives or benchmarks. Take a moment and review Candace's IEP and note the way that these are developed. It's a decision of each district as to whether they will develop annual goals or benchmarks or just develop annual goals. Check with your district policies and procedures for this information. Federal law requires that students on alternate assessments to have goals, as well as short-term objectives or benchmarks. Until now, we were focused on the needs of the child in the present level section and setting the direction for meeting those needs in the measurable annual goal. Now we will begin to focus on services for the student. Specially designed instruction, or SDI, in its simplest form, is what the teacher does to instruct, assess, and reteach the student. Specially designed instruction is systematically designed and implemented to address the assessed need or needs of the student. Specially designed instruction is necessary for the student to make progress toward the annual goal, rather than merely being beneficial. Specially designed instruction is planned, designed, and initially delivered by a special education teacher. Specially designed instruction is not available regularly in general education to the degree or intensity needed by the student. The ARC selects specially designed instruction according to the unique needs of the student. For additional examples, see the IEP and Lesson Plan Development Handbook. The handbook can be found on the Kentucky Department of Education's website, or reaching out to your local Director of Special Education or educational cooperative. Let's take a look at the specially designed instruction for Candace and reflect on how they connect to the annual goals. As you visit classrooms, look for the specially designed instruction as matched to the goal being taught to ensure implementation of the IEP. Reflect on the IEP for Candace and the variety of specially designed instruction provided. How does the specially designed instruction match each annual goal? Specially designed instruction is not a huge, unfocused list of items, but those instructionally chosen because they are positively impacting to the learning of the specific student. The effect of specially designed instruction on learning should be observed and measured as the goals are progress monitored. Next is supplementary aids and services. Supplementary aids and services, or SAS, is what the student needs in order to attain the goals and make progress in the general curriculum, to participate in extracurricular and other non-academic activities, and be educated and participate with other students with and without disabilities. SAS includes strategies, aids, and services. The decisions for SAS are supported by student performance data and are based on needs related to the disability in order to make progress toward annual goals. The ARC identifies the specific materials, resources, aids, strategies, or services the student requires in the general education environment or other education-related setting to gain access to the general curriculum indicated by the student performance data. SAS are based on peer-reviewed research to the extent that that's practicable. Given the adverse effect or the "so what" statement, every student with a disability requires supplementary aids and services. General education teachers should share how the supplementary aids and services are used in the classroom and how it has helped the student gain access to the curriculum. Notice the example of supplementary aids and services selected for Candace. Supplementary aids and services are not just a bunch of nice things to have, like a laundry list. All of these are expected to be provided to the student and to be used during instruction. Accommodations. The ARC may identify assessment accommodations to participate in state or district-wide assessments if they're used consistently as part of the student's routine instruction and classroom assessment. Decisions concerning the use of assessment modifications are supported by the student performance data and the IEP. For example, within the present levels, annual goals, short-term objectives or benchmarks, specially designed instruction, supplementary aids and services and related services, and are documented as specially designed instruction or supplementary aids and services. Prior to entering the decisions on the IEP, the ARC may complete the Accommodations Determination Form in Infinite Campus to document the appropriate accommodations necessary for the student. For students who are eligible for alternate assessment, the ARC must provide a statement of the decision and reasons for the decision to determine the student met all criteria for eligibility for alternate assessment. This decision is reviewed annually, and documentation is completed at every annual review meeting. Accommodations should be considered temporary strategies and be faded when appropriate as the student gains skills and knowledge. Accommodations shall be individualized and specifically designed to aid the student as the student learns, and faded or reduced as the student gains or demonstrates increased skill and greater independence. So, accommodations are based on individual needs of the student and not a disability category. Accommodations must be supported by evaluation information or data and part of the student's ongoing instructional program. Accommodations must relate to the IEP. The present levels must identify the accommodation and why it's needed, and allow access to the general curriculum while providing a way to demonstrate what students know. Accommodations shall not inappropriately impact the content being measured, nor should it reduce their learning expectations. Accommodations are part of the student's regular instructional routine and not introduced just for state assessment. Possible testing accommodations are listed on the screen. Extended time, if it's selected, must now be documented as time and a half or double time. The ARC identifies program modifications and supports for school personnel that are to be provided on behalf of a student to meet the unique needs of the student. This includes specialized training, the use of school time, or use of school staff, and may involve specialized training for any staff who come in contact with a student, including bus drivers, paraprofessionals, general and special education teachers, related service providers, and cafeteria workers. Examples of program modifications and supports include gait training, feeding procedures, medical procedures and communication systems, diapering, positioning, and so on. If the ARC determines that no program modification and supports are needed, the ARC checks the box, "Not needed at this time." It's important to note that this section may not be left blank. If the child is receiving services through a co-teaching model, the model is described under Program Modifications and Supports for School Personnel. If consultation is the service delivery method, this section explains the anticipated frequency and type of consultation. Here are some examples from the IEP guidance document. LRE, or Least Restrictive Environment. Least Restrictive Environment is an entitlement of special education law. IDEA requires that students with disabilities be educated with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. Students should not be removed from this setting unless the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in regular classes cannot occur even with the use of supplementary aids and services. A district must make available a continuum of placements as part of the LRE requirements. Inclusion begins with the belief that every student is a member of a general education classroom. A foundation for determining LRE begins with an appropriate educational plan, or IEP, for the student. Once the ARC completes the instructional planning and services needed sections of the IEP, the ARC members determine where the IEP services will be implemented. LRE explains the extent, if any, to which the student will not participate in general education. It's important to note that the ARC discussion needs to address any potential harmful effects on the student or the quality of service. This discussion should be documented in the conference summary. Merely stating whether or not something has or has not a harmful effect is not sufficient. You must be student-specific. Take a look at Candace's IEP. Notice how the LRE is described in the LRE and the IEP, Special Education and Related Services section. LRE discussions and decisions are also documented in the conference summary. The ARC documents the LRE in multiple locations. The first location is in the IEP LRE section. This is where we document the extent, if any, to which the student will not participate in general education. The second location is in the IEP Special Education Services and Related Services sections. These sections contain projected date of beginning and ending services, anticipated frequency, duration, and location of the services. LRE is also documented in the ARC Conference Summary Action Notice. All three sections should match. This slide contains a graphic representation of the anticipated frequency and duration of services. The following are examples of two different formats for writing LRE statements. First, could be a narrative. For example, for a student who receives instruction in a content area in the regular classroom with co-teaching and specially designed instruction in a resource room, the explanation may state, Josh will receive all core content in the regular classroom. He will also receive language arts instruction in the resource room. Or it could be bulleted. The latter is the preferred method. Note how the statement is reflected in the anticipated frequency and duration of services, and they can match. IDEA requires that the school district must have available a continuum of educational placements, and the ARC determines the appropriateness of placements based upon the individual needs of a child. The continuum of placements must include first, the regular education classroom, followed by the special education classroom, special schools, home instruction, and then hospital or institution-based instruction. Specifically, the law states that a child with a disability shall not be removed from education in age-appropriate regular classrooms solely because of the needed modifications in the general curriculum. It's clear that modifications are expected to be made in the general education classroom. Related services are those transportation and developmental, supportive, or corrective services which are needed by a student with a disability to benefit from special education. Related services complement and supplement the specially designed instruction provided to the student. A partial list of related services is detailed on this slide. It's important to know that LRE is also determined for related services. Extended School Year, or ESY. Extended School Year means specially designed instruction and related services that are provided to a child with a disability beyond the normal school year, in accordance with the child's IEP and at no cost to the parents. ESY is provided on an individual student basis for the purposes of maintaining a student's current skill level, which, without continued instruction, would be lost or would require an inordinate amount of time to regain as compared to similar age peers who are not disabled and who experience the same lapse in instruction. ESY services are not designed to teach new skills, to prevent natural amounts of regression, nor to assist a student to make additional progress in a skill. Rather, ESY is designed to maintain a student's present level of performance, and thus prevent an excessive period of recoupment. ESY is not limited to a particular category of disability. Further, a district may not unilaterally limit the type, amount, or duration of the services. Local district procedures provide guidance for the ARC determining ESY supports and services. An explanation is required no matter which box is checked. If more data is needed is checked, specific explanations are required, including what data and why. Data is critical for the determination of ESY. If the district does not have data, for example, a transfer student or summer to fall regression data is not available, student transitioning from Part C programming with an individual family service plan, the need for ESY may be established by expert opinion based on assessment of the individual child regarding whether the child is projected to regress and fail to recruit previously attained skills within a certain period of time. Post-secondary transition is embedded in all components of the IEP. Beginning in the student's 8th grade, or when the student reaches the age of 14, transition must be considered by the ARC. Transition information is located in the present level, annual goals, and transition section of the IEP. Please refer to the post-secondary transition training for more details. Post-secondary transition is embedded in all components of the IEP. Congratulations, you've completed the IEP overview for ARC Chair. Please refer to the guidance document for individual education program development for detailed information concerning the IEP process. Remember, IEP development is a process and not an event. Your role in the development of an IEP is important. The knowledge about students' needs gathered from your involvement in the ARC process provides the foundation to support the monitoring and guidance of high-quality special education services that benefit our learners. This page contains links to resources that may be helpful to you in your role as an ARC chairperson. This concludes the IEP module.